Alright everyone, so today I wanted to go over some of the best epic champions in Raid Shadow Legends that focus primarily on DPS. So these are going to be your pure DPS epics. Now we've got 8 champions that we're going to talk about today, but as I always say with videos like this, just because a certain champion is not in the list doesn't mean that they are not good. There are plenty of other great epic champions that do tons of damage that are not on this list, but I wanted to focus on 8 of them today. So absolutely room for part 2, part 3 in the future. With that being said though, let's head over to the champion index to talk about the first champion in the list here, and I absolutely cannot make a video like this without talking about her. We're going to go to the Orcs faction, and number 1 is going to be Zargala. Now Zargala is just a great epic champion. She's going to be in a lot of people's top positions for just overall epics, and she has a great DPS skill kit. So she is an attack-based champion. Her first skill here, attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 1 turn. So having a weaken, which is a fantastic debuff on her auto attack, is absolutely great. So you're going to see enemies consistently have that debuff without having to worry about, it not getting activated or, having a long cooldown where it's not always active. Then you have her second ability here, attacks one enemy, instantly activates the crack armor skill if the target is killed by this attack. Now something very noteworthy about the devastate skill is it starts off with a 4-turn cooldown, but you can see at level 6 and level 7 you could actually reduce the cooldown of the skill twice with skill books, so you can get it all the way down from 4 turns down to 2 turns. Now her third ability is Crack Armor, attacks all enemies 3 times. After the first hit, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. You can also get that down to a 4-turn cooldown with skill books and increase the buff debuff chance by quite a bit. So a very, very solid AoE skill with that strong version of decreased defense. You also have her second ability, which instantly has a chance to activate her third ability. And finally, you have her passive, increases ally accuracy in all battles by 40. So just overall, very well-built, good skill kit for a DPS offensive champion. Zargala is going to be in a lot of people's top epics and absolutely worthy of the first spot in this list for today. So now let's move on to number 2, and we are going to go to the Dark Elves. And we are going to talk about Lua. Now, unfortunately, I don't actually have Lua because she is a Void Epic, and Void Epics can be a little bit tricky to get if you don't go too crazy on the Void Shards, but she is great. Again, very similar to Zargala, she's going to be in a lot of people's top positions for just overall epics in the game. Not just pure DPS, but she's very solid. So her first ability, attacks one enemy, deals 50% of the inflicted damage to all enemies if this attack is critical. Now, the great thing about crit is it's kind of one of those stats where you can very easily build to get it to 100%, so it's consistently going to activate that additional portion of her first skill. Then you have her second ability, attacks all enemies 3 times. That's right, an AoE that attacks all enemies 3 times. Each critical hit heals this champion by 2.5% HP. So again, you're going to be building crit anyway because of this first ability. So now you also have that crit benefiting her second ability here. It's an AoE. You're going to see a lot of attacks. You're going to see a lot of crits, and you're going to get a lot of heals from this second ability right here. So not only is she going to be doing a lot of damage, but she actually has some sustain on her second skill as well. You can get this down to a 3-turn cooldown with skill books. And then her third ability attacks one enemy. This attack fully depletes the turn meter, which is huge, will ignore shield and block damage buffs, which is also very, very important. Now, another theme that you'll see in a good amount of champions in a video like today is they're going to have certain parts of their abilities really work around mitigation factors like shield, block damage. You'll have, certain abilities that scale off of enemy max HP, which is going to increase their damage even more, ignore defense, and so on and so forth. You can get this down to a 4-turn cooldown with skill books, and overall, definitely going to be one of just the best well-built epics in the game, and absolutely going to be a great damage dealer. So Lua is in second place here. Alright, moving on to number 3. Now, this is a champion that I have talked about before, and he has a certain ability and a certain condition that really makes his skill do an insane amount of damage. And we are going to go to the High Elves. And of course, that is going to be Royal Guard. Now, His first skill right here attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Very nice to have a strong version of one of the good debuffs on an auto attack. Again, the reason why I say it's good on an auto attack is because these are the skills that don't have cooldowns. When I say auto attack, by the way, that refers to the first skill, because it's the one that doesn't have a cooldown, so you don't have to rely on that. You know, if it doesn't apply or it has a long cooldown, then it's not going to be as consistent, but you're going to be applying it a lot, so you should pretty much always see that decreased defense on enemies. Now, his second ability here has the enemy max HP factor, which is going to be huge and a really big theme among some other champions in this video today. So we have his takedown, attacks all enemies, damage increases according to enemy max HP, 4-turn cooldown. Now that's really important because, of course, gear is going to be one of the primary ways to scale your stats and increase your damage, but now you have another way to scale your damage that isn't based off of your gear. Quite simply, the more HP that enemies have, the more damage you're going to do to them with skills that are based off of enemy max HP. And you can see some absolutely crazy numbers with skills that have this scaling modifier, like well over 1 million. It's absolutely crazy. Is really good for endgame dungeons as well, because, you know, those stage 20s, you are fighting bosses that have a ton of HP, and the more HP they have, the more they are going to benefit from that enemy max HP scaling ability right there. Okay, now you have his third skill, attacks 4 times at random. This is also something important to note, is there's going to be a few other champions that have, you know, attacks many times at random. The great thing about that is when you are only facing one enemy, it means that they are going to take all of those hits at once. So you're going to see a lot of damage stack up. Even though it's at random, if there's only one target to actually attack, well, then of course they're going to be getting all of those hits. Each hit has a 60% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Each hit also has a 60% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 25%. You can get that down to a 4-turn cooldown and increase the debuff chance by 15% as well through skill books. And his aura increases ally attack in dungeons by 35%, which is quite a bit as well. So he's got a great aura to go along with it, and dungeons is going to be one of the best areas to put Royal Guard to use. So great champion for 3rd place on the list. Now we are going to move on to the Skinwalkers, and we are going to go to, let's see, right here. A lot of the Skinwalkers look similar, so sometimes I get a bit mixed up. But Basher is an attack-based champion, and his auto attack attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a 25% weakened debuff for 2 turns. His next ability attacks all enemies, increases the cooldown of all of the target skills by 2 turns. And his third ability attacks 4 times at random. There we go again with that, where if we only have one target, they're going to be the recipient of all those random attacks. Has a 75% chance of placing a block buffs debuff for 2 turns. And then you have his aura increases ally HP in all battles by 25%. Now, something very noteworthy about Basher is he does have that weaken on his auto attack with a very high chance of applying. Weaken is a very, very strong debuff, and to have that on the auto, again, without the cooldowns, means you're going to see it very consistently applied to the enemies that you are attacking. He's a void-based champion as well, which means you don't have to worry about the affinity weakness, and overall, he's just a pretty solid, well-built DPS champion. Yeah, definitely going to be in a lot of people's lists. Something I've noticed that Basher is definitely, you know, he's not the top tier in a lot of people's lists, but he's fairly consistently placed pretty high up in a good amount of people's overall epic champion lists. All right, next up on the list, we're going to go to the next champion and the only other champion in this list that I don't actually have. And we're going to go to the Night Revenants, and that is going to be Skullcrown. Now, something important to note about the next couple of champions is they are going to be AoE champions, and AoE is huge when it comes to pure DPS, because something that people take for granted is, especially when you're doing high-level dungeons, you have to go through 2 waves of trash where you're fighting many enemies all at once, and if you only have single target abilities, it's going to take a lot longer in order to clear those trash waves, and of course, that's no good. So having a solid, well-built high DPS champion that also has AoE skills is going to be huge when it comes to mid and end game dungeons. So first ability attacks all enemies, places an extra hit if the target has more than 50% HP. So that is pretty huge. Tons of extra damage when you are fighting stuff that is still going to be above that 50% HP threshold. I know this ability, you're going to see this a lot in Arena as well. Her second skill attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns. There we go again with the weaken, very solid debuff. You can get this down to a 3-turn cooldown. And that's all her active skills. So she's very simple in terms of her active skills. The rest we have are passives and her aura. Places an unkillable buff on this champion for 1 turn every time their HP drops below 20%. You can get that down to a 4-turn cooldown. I think a lot of us know the frustrations of seeing this passive activate in the arena. And then her next passive is when Senesh is on the same team. Speaking of Senesh, by the way, might be the next champion we talk about. 8-turn cooldown, but you can get that down to 6 turns. And then her speed aura, which is another reason why you see her in the arena a lot, increases ally speed in the arena by 23%. So great champion with a very simplistic skill kit just based on dishing out a ton of AoE damage while also applying that very useful weaken debuff. And next up on the list, which is going to be champion number 6, we're going to actually stay in the Night Revenant, and that is Senesh. So very similar to Skullcrown, we have AoE abilities. Attacks all enemies, places an extra hit on enemies with less than 50% HP. Very interesting, of course. Very similar to Skullcrown, but a bit the other side of the scale there. We have Vaporize. Attacks one enemy, puts the target skills on cooldown. This is huge. Heals the ally with the lowest HP by 25%. You can get that down to a 3-turn cooldown. And then her Equalize, which is equalizes the HP of all allies. The HP levels of all allies will be brought up to the level of the ally with the highest HP, then heals the ally by 10% of their max HP. You can get that down to a 5-turn cooldown. One of the very few non-DPS type abilities that we've actually seen on any of the champions in this list. Very useful, of course, but even without that ability, we are just looking at another very solid, well-built AoE champion that's going to be dishing out a lot of damage, which is huge, especially for, you know, mid and late game content like dungeons where you have to face those trash waves. And then her aura increases ally HP and faction crypts by 31%. Alright, so the next 2 champions are very interesting because I want to talk about what could be arguably the worst of the 8 champions on this list, but my mind was definitely changed on this champion a while ago, and very similar to Royal Guard, he has one of those based off of enemy max HP scaling modifiers that makes this guy very, very good. And we are going to talk about Husk. So Husk is going to be kind of middle of the road in a lot of people's tier lists, and he's kind of like the, in my opinion, I guess the weaker version of Royal Guard. He doesn't offer quite as much to the table, but he still does have one of those scales off of max HP from enemies type modifiers, and the amount of damage that you can see from an ability like that is huge when it comes to high level dungeons. Like, I'm talking well over 1 million. So his first skill here attacks one enemy 2 times, has a 20% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. Second ability, there's the enemy max HP modifier, attacks all enemies, has a 35% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. Damage inflicted is proportional to the enemy max HP. You can get that down to a 4-turn cooldown. His third ability attacks one enemy, damage increases according to this champion's current HP. Get that down to a 3-turn cooldown. It increases ally HP in the arena by 30%. So overall, his skill kit is not quite going to be as useful as Royal Guard. Royal Guard had that decreased defense, I believe it was, on his auto attack without a cooldown, so that was really useful. But still, this ability right here, based off of enemy max HP, which isn't AoE, you can see some absolute crazy numbers with this ability. You don't even have to gear him out super crazy. He is an HP-based champion, so he is going to be very tanky, of course, but because this doesn't scale off of his actual gear itself, it's going to scale off of the HP that enemies have. You know, as long as you're facing stuff like if you're in high-level dungeons where bosses have tons of HP, it's going to hit like a truck. And I highly encourage you guys, if you aren't convinced about Husk, check out Stu Gaming. He has a great video about him, and you'll see those crazy numbers from both champions like Royal Guard and Husk from skills that are based off of enemy max HP. But now I want to move into who is now arguably the best champion on this list, but definitely a very, very tricky one. And that is going to be going back to the orcs, and it is Seer. Now, Seer also has an ability that is based off of enemy max HP, but it can be a bit deceiving at first glance. So she is technically a support-based champion. We have her first ability, attacks one enemy, has a 15% chance of granting an extra turn, which is always nice. Can get that up by an additional 5% through skill books as well. Then you have her second ability here, places a 30% increased crit rate buff on all allies for 2 turns, places a 25% weaken debuff on all allies or all enemies for 2 turns. Can lower that down to a 3-turn cooldown as well, which is really nice. And again, we have that weaken, which is a very, very good debuff to apply to enemies. And her third ability, Karma Burn. So this is the skill right here, which can be deceiving, but if you kind of build around this skill properly, because it is based off of enemy max HP, once again, like Royal Guard and Husk, you can see some absolute crazy DPS numbers. I'm talking about well over 1 million. Removes all buffs from all allies and enemies, then attacks all enemies. Damage increases according to the number of removed buffs. Has a 50% chance of placing a sleep debuff on all enemies for 1 turn. The chance of placing a sleep debuff increases by 5% for each buff removed. Inflicts less damage to bosses. So, you know, you kind of have to give up. This is like a sacrificial ability here. You have to give up your buffs in order to do damage. But again, if you have the right team and you build around this skill, it's based off of the enemy max HP, so you can see some crazy, crazy numbers. Definitely check out some videos that feature Seer if you are not convinced. Because the main highlight, in my opinion, for pure DPS champions are those abilities that are based off of enemy max HP. Because if you build around them properly, you are just going to destroy endgame dungeons where the bosses have a ton of HP. Of course, her last ability as well increases ally resist in all battles by 40. So that is going to be it for this video here. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Like I said, just because a certain champion was not featured in this list does not mean that they are not good or they don't do a lot of damage. I really wanted to highlight 8 in this video, but there is absolutely room for, you know, part 2 and part 3 in the future. So keep your eyes out. Let me know who your favorite pure DPS epic champion in Raid Shadow Legends is. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did and you want more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to help out, tossing a quick like means more than you can imagine as well. So thank you to all of you guys who do that. And more Raid Shadow Legends videos, guides, tutorials, and all that fun stuff should be popping up on the screen right about now. Feel free to check them out. Over 220 raid videos on the channel. But if not, until next time, have a great day, everyone. Take care. And this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.